Okay, we're going to go ahead and look at our information for our test on Friday over ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Let me get this pulled up properly. There we go. All right, so Friday, we're going to have a test over ancient Greece and ancient Rome, the first two sections of chapter 13. I'm going to go through the important things that you need to know to do well on the test. We'll start with ancient Greece. Ancient Greece was known as the cradle of civilization because it's where modern civilization was born, the place where math, science, literature, architecture, government, education, where all those things really started. And while this all happened 2,500 years ago and isn't modern by our standards today, back then it was setting the stage for what all the civilizations that came after it were going to be like. Ancient Greece was broken into city-states, which they called polises. Some examples would be Athens, Sparta, and Ithaca. City-states normally didn't get along with each other and often went to war, most famously Athens and Sparta, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the city-states all felt they were superior to each other. People of ancient Greece didn't think of themselves as Greek. They thought of themselves as Athenian if they were from Athens, or Spartan if they were from Sparta. So there was a rivalry, constant rivalries among the city-states, and they very seldom came together in cooperation, which ended up being the reason why ancient Greece didn't last very long. The few times that they did come together were when they were under attack from a large army, such as the Persians. The Persians came across the Aegean Sea and attacked Greece, and the city-states at that point decided they better work together because alone they couldn't have fought off the Persian army. Athens, one of the best-known city-states of ancient Greece, is the home of democracy. It was a type of government that was started in Athens where people were in control of their government. The people got to vote for leaders, and then those leaders would come up with ideas for new laws. They would recommend laws to the people, and the people would come together and vote. So every law in the Athenian democracy was voted on. Every new law had to be approved by all of the people, all the citizens that could vote. Okay, Greece's, sorry about that. Greece's golden age happened between 500 BC and 200 BC, and it's a time of great achievements in art, science, mathematics, architecture, government, philosophy. They had great philosophers like Socrates and Aristotle and Plato. So a golden age in any civilization is a time of great accomplishments and great achievements. And for Athens in particular, led by their great leader Pericles initially, that time for them ran from 500 BC to 200 BC. The ancient Greeks were polytheistic, which means that they believed in many gods. And I know in language arts class you've been reading about Ulysses, which is one of the great mythologies of ancient Greece, and you've been introduced to lots of gods and goddesses in reading those stories. So gods like Zeus and Hades and Poseidon, and goddesses like Athena. And the ancient Greeks made up many stories and myths about their gods and goddesses. Most ancient people that had many gods and goddesses that they believed in used those gods and goddesses to help them understand or explain the world that they lived in. They didn't understand why there were storms, why there was lightning. So they came up with the idea that somebody must have angered Zeus and he was throwing lightning bolts. They didn't understand why they dreamed. So they had their god of sleep, Hypnos, and his son Morpheus, who caused people to sleep, to fall asleep and caused people to dream. And that those mythologies, the Greek gods and goddesses, are part of the Greek culture that still exists with us today. 2,500 years later, those stories are still being told. Those stories are still being read. Hollywood still mixes those ancient Greek stories into movies, into TV shows. Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it isn't. All right, eventually this great Greek empire fell apart. The main reason was that the city-states, like I said earlier, weren't united. They, generally speaking, were in fights and struggles with each other. And Athens and Sparta fought a long war, the Peloponnesian War, that weakened Greece greatly. And King Philip of Macedonia is a country just above Greece, just north of Greece on the map. King Philip of Macedonia saw an opportunity with Greece being weakened, to come in and try to dominate the city-states. So he began it all, and after he died, his son Alexander the Great was able to conquer the city-states one by one and create his own empire. Alexander extended the empire all the way to India before his men forced him to turn and come back. They had been away from home for, I think it was about 10 years at that time. They hadn't seen their homes in Greece for 10 years, and they just refused to go on. Alexander the Great wanted to conquer all of the known world, everywhere. Every time they conquered a new land, he wanted to keep going farther and extend the empire. But on their way back, Alexander the Great fell ill and died before they ever returned to Greece. But there are signs of Alexander the Great all over the old Greek Empire, cities throughout northern Africa, throughout the Middle East, that were named after Alexander the Great. Alexandropolis, Alexandria in Egypt, all bear his name. Okay. We also talked about ancient Rome in this chapter. Rome is a small city in Italy, and it was originally ruled by Latin and Etruscan kings. Those were two groups of people that lived on the Italian peninsula. And the people of Rome didn't like the kings that they had. They had some corrupt kings, some kings that weren't looking out for the best interest of the people. So it finally got to the point where the people of Rome drove out the last Etruscan king and created a new type of government called a republic. And similar to what the Greeks had in Athens with their democracy, people were again involved in the government. And in the case of the Roman Republic, citizens voted for leaders who were called the Senate, and those people ended up making decisions for Rome. The people trusted that the people that they elected would then make good decisions, make good laws for them. So a little bit different than what ancient Greece did, where the people still voted on every law. In Rome's Republic, once the leaders were elected, they were the ones that had the power to make the decisions. The United States government, our government, is modeled after the Roman Republic. Your parents vote for political leaders who then go to Washington, D.C., and then your parents have entrusted those people to make good decisions for them when it comes to making laws. Probably the most famous ancient Greek was Julius Caesar. He was a general in the Roman army. He came from a very rich family. And his success as a general, he conquered Gaul, which is what we would call France nowadays, made him very popular with the people. So he was appointed consul of the Senate. The way the Roman Republic worked, they had their senators, and the senators appointed two consuls, two men similar to our president nowadays. But these people, the consuls, were to serve 1 year, so they wouldn't get too much power, because remember, the people of Rome didn't like the kings that they had. And instead of just being one consul, they had two, and they would have to agree. They had the ability to veto each other. And veto means when you just flat out say, no, that's not going to happen. Now, Caesar, because of his popularity with the people and because of his desire for power, became more and more power hungry over the course of his career, and eventually was able to get himself named dictator for life, meaning that he wasn't going to live by that 1 year term that other consuls had. He was going to be a consul or the dictator of Rome till he died. Eventually, the Senate started to get worried that Caesar really wanted to become a king. And if he became a king, then he'd want to get rid of the Senate so he could have total power over Rome. And at that point, a group of senators got together and plotted to assassinate Caesar, because they wanted to avoid the Roman Republic from falling apart. Unfortunately for them, their actions ended up having the opposite effect, because Julius Caesar's son Octavian, who was his adopted son, avenged Caesar's death and became Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire. Rome was no longer a republic, and they now had an emperor who had total power. So even though the senators that assassinated Julius Caesar thought that they were keeping their role as senators safe, it really ended up backfiring on them. Now, Octavian, or Emperor Augustus, when he came to power, he leads Rome into a time known as the Pax Romana, which is Latin for Roman peace, a 200-year period of peace and success in the Roman Empire. You can think of it like the golden age of Athens, that time of great Athenian achievements. The Romans went through the same thing. We call that the Pax Romana, the time of great achievements for the Roman Empire. Okay, during the time of the Roman Empire, a new religion called Christianity began. And Christianity was a monotheistic religion, a religion that has only one God. Like the Greeks, the Romans believed in many different gods and goddesses. As a matter of fact, as we've discussed, the Romans had basically taken the Greek mythology, changed the names of the gods and goddesses, and made it their own. So this new religion starts in the Roman Empire called Christianity, based on the teachings of a man that lived in their empire named Jesus Christ. And it worried the Romans. The Romans thought that Jesus was trying to raise an army against the empire, and so they put Jesus to death, hoping that would end his teachings. But instead, his followers continued to spread the things that he had taught them throughout the Roman Empire. And even though Christians in the Roman Empire were persecuted, they were thrown in jail, they were fined, they were even put to death, sometimes for the entertainment of the citizens of Rome. They'd be taken to the Colosseum and put in the middle of the Colosseum with lions and tigers that had been brought up from Africa. This religion of Christianity grabbed hold and stuck in the Roman Empire. It wouldn't go away. Eventually, after years and years of persecution, Emperor Constantine accepts Christianity as his own religion and then declares that all of the Roman Empire will be a Christian empire. So it's kind of strange that the Christians go from being persecuted early on in the Roman Empire to being the official religion of the Roman Empire. All right, just like the Greeks, the Roman Empire eventually falls apart. There's lots of different reasons, but some of them are they went through a series of poor leaders, and by poor leaders I mean bad leaders, leaders that were corrupt, leaders that just wanted to become more and more rich themselves, who didn't care about the health and welfare of their empire. The spread of Christianity chipped away at the Roman Empire's influence and control over people. There was a rise in taxes, which led to more poverty among people. There were times of unemployment. People were going hungry, and hungry people and poor people are not happy people. And so they started to lose their loyalty to Rome. In addition, the empire itself had just gotten too big for the Romans to control. It stretched too far to the north into what's nowadays Germany, England. They had control of most of northern Africa. They had control of parts of the Middle East. But their empire had gotten so big that they didn't have enough soldiers to defend and protect all of those parts. And different tribes of people that the Romans had defeated while they expanded their empire started to notice there were less soldiers protecting what used to be their lands, and they started to fight back. Eventually, some of these people, who were known as the barbarians, the Romans called them barbarians because they didn't feel they were as civilized as the Romans were. These people, in the Romans' mind, were dirty. They didn't understand art and music and literature. They weren't as cultured. They didn't build huge, wonderful buildings like they did in the Roman Empire. They lived in small huts. They lived more primitively. But these barbarians began to attack the empire and eventually invaded the city of Rome itself, where they looted, stole everything that they could that was of value. They burned down buildings. They destroyed artwork. And after 3 days of looting, left the city, but for the most part left the western part of the Roman Empire in shambles. Okay, I want to do a quick comparison of governments because this is part of our test. Ancient Greece was a direct democracy, and I've talked about this a little bit already, but just to make sure that we're fully understanding. Ancient Greece was a direct democracy where leaders were elected, and those leaders suggested laws, but every time a law was going to come up for a vote, all of the citizens, and citizens in ancient Greece were men who owned property, they gathered together to cast their final vote on whether it was going to become a law or not. So it was a direct democracy. People voted on every single law that came across the table. In contrast, ancient Rome had a republic. And in a republic, citizens elect leaders who then make laws for them. So by electing your leader, you're trusting that that leader is going to create good laws for you. So the people of Rome didn't always gather up to cast a vote for every new law that came across the table. They allowed their elected leaders to do that for them. Okay, finally, before I wrap this up, make sure that you're studying your map locations. We talked about that in class today. Everyone has a map. I showed you exactly where those things were so that you could label them properly. So making sure you know where Italy is, where Greece is, the Mediterranean Sea, the Aegean Sea, the northern part of Africa. We labeled Persia on the map, which is what is Turkey nowadays. We labeled Europe. We labeled Asia, if I didn't say that already. We labeled the cities of Rome and Athens, and we labeled Great Britain. So make sure that you study those map locations. That seems to be a place that many of you struggle when it comes time to take a test. Okay, now I'm going to post this on my website, and I'll also post it to my Facebook page. But just so you understand, there's going to be an opportunity for a point of extra credit on your test if you've watched this video and you go to my website and watch it. If you're watching this from Facebook, you're going to want to still follow the link to my website, because on my website, there's going to be a short form to fill out after you're done watching the video that asks for your name and your mod and your teacher's name. And then there's one question that you need to answer for me. And once you submit that, make sure you click the submit button. I'll get a spreadsheet that will have everybody's name that took part and what your answer was. And if you're correct, I'm going to give you an extra point on the test of extra credit.